Now, I got a lot of problems with the president's budget. After all, he did follow the budget law. He submitted a budget each of the 4 budget seasons, unlike the Senate, which chose to ignore the budget law by not offering a budget in 2010, 2011, and now they say they won't do it in 2012. I mean, go figure. You're elected to represent the people of your district or your state. We have a debt crisis on the horizon, meaning you need to pass a budget to fix that, and they've decided for over 1,000 days not to do anything about it. Where I come from, that's a firing offense. But let me talk about the president's budget. And there's a lot of problems I have with it, but let's focus on what the purpose of this conference is: growth. It makes our growth situation worse. There are a number of reasons why. I'll just quote Tim Geithner, the Secretary of the Treasury, who came to the Budget Committee about a month ago. And he said to us, we're not suggesting that we have a solution to the long-term fiscal problem. We don't. We just don't like yours. I couldn't have said it better myself. This is, in essence, what the president is doing. Rather than seeing this very clear and present danger to our country, to our economic future, to our way of life, rather than putting a solution out there, wait for the Republicans to offer theirs, then attack it. Whatever you call that, it's not called leadership. Second, certainty. If you put a budget plan in place that deals with the drivers of our debt, to quote John Taylor, who I know is one of your panelists here, or to quote Chairman Bernanke, that will give us an immediate boost to growth today. Confidence trajectory, the future, the bond markets, businesses, they're looking to see if leadership is being placed in the federal government in Washington to get this situation under control so that they can take risks, so that they know that they have a certain future that is one to be optimistic about. And until you have a plan like this in place, you will not reap that kind of a growth dividend. Another reason why I think the president's budget is bad for growth: cronyism. Now, both parties have been subject to what I call crony capitalism, or industrial party. For us, we got confused. We thought being pro-business was being pro-market, when in fact it was being pro-incumbent business. And it ended up erecting barriers to entry against would-be competitors. So it's easier for us to go back to our roots, our core principles, which is be pro-market. It's a little harder for the left to do this, I think, because the president, in my opinion, subscribes to the notion that they just know better in Washington, that Congress can go pass a lot of these vague laws, and then we have a permanent class of technocrats and bureaucrats who can better micromanage society and our economy, who can do a better job of subsidizing and picking winners and losers, whether it's through regulations, whether it's creating too big to fail banks through Dodd-Frank, whether it's the tax code or Solyndra or the regulatory state. They believe in a process which ends up putting entrepreneurial, small business, risk-taking capitalism and putting it aside and replacing it with connected capitalism, with crony capitalism, with big government capitalism. That replaces the rule of law with the rule of bureaucrats, with the rule of the connected. That's probably one of my biggest criticisms of his budget. But finally, let me get to the nut of the matter: taxes, tax reform. This is where I think the president's budget is the most anti-growth. For in January, he is proposing that the top effective marginal income tax rate goes up to 44.8%. Where Paul and I come from, overseas, which we mean Lake Superior, the Canadians just dropped their business tax to 15%. 9 out of 10 businesses in Wisconsin file their taxes as individuals. 8 out of 10 businesses in all of America aren't corporations. They're businesses that file their taxes as individuals, like subchapter S corporations and partnerships and LLCs. So what we're basically saying to them is, if you get successful, if you buy 4 acres out in the industrial park in Elkhorn, Wisconsin, and you start with 5 employees, and then you get to 25 employees, and you get to 250 employees, we used to call that the American dream. Now you're part of the evil rich. Now you're going to be hit with effectively about a 45% tax rate. Throw our state income tax on top of that, and you're over 50%. How on earth are they going to be able to compete with the likes of the Canadians who are taxing themselves at 15%, or the Irish at 12.5%, or the Japanese, or who are lower than us now, or the Chinese? We've got to remember we're in a global economy. And if we tax our job creators, if we tax these businesses where 65% of the net new jobs come from, where more than half of Americans work for today, If we tax them at such higher rates than our foreign competitors are taxing their companies, we lose, they win. So to me, this is a system that is wrecked for austerity. Higher tax rates, more complexity, more loopholes is what the president's budget is proposing. Now, the bottom line is we've tried this approach. We have tried chasing higher spending with higher taxes and more debt. It hasn't worked. We tried the stimulus spending. We tried all the demand side Keynesian stimulus. All it got was a debt hangover and a cloud of more uncertainty hanging over our economy. And so it's put us on slow growth. And look at the social pathologies that have failed. Our poverty rates are the highest they are in a generation. 1 out of 6 Americans are in poverty now. The woman unemployment rate is the highest it's been since we've measured it. So these policies aren't working. The good news is there's a better way. And the other good news is some of us are actually putting ideas on the table to show that there's a better way. That's what our Path to Prosperity budget does. Now, to Paul's point, a lot of the political pundits told us that we were crazy. When we first started putting these budget ideas out there, the pollsters and the pundits and the political class said, whatever you do, don't do that. You're going to give up your seat. You're going to risk political death. I got to tell you, if you want to be good at these jobs, you have to be willing to lose these jobs. If all you do is worry about getting reelected and doing what the pundits and the pollsters tell you is the right thing for the moment based upon the phone calls that took place last night, you're going to go nowhere. You're going to be chasing your tail and running in circles. We know what works. Freedom works. Limited government works. Free enterprise works. So if you take a look at our budget, it is a huge contrast. To be really quick, the contrast is this. We actually deal with the problem. We actually see the debt crisis coming. We see the drivers of the debt, and we deal with it. We have to have those fundamental structural entitlement reforms so that we can preempt austerity. And the sooner we act, the better off we all are. We actually have proposals that Medicare doesn't change the benefits for anybody who is in and near retirement. You wait much longer, you have a debt crisis, all bets are off. You won't be able to do that. So what we're saying is, let's preempt austerity by getting us on the right path so that those people who retired, my mom's been on Medicare for 11 years. You know, we have this rule in Wisconsin, when you turn 65, you got to go to Florida for the winter. She's been doing that since she's been on Medicare. We don't need to pull the rug out from under these people who've already organized their lives around this promise. The problem is, it's a promise with a $37 trillion hole. So if we reform these programs now for the younger generation, we can cash flow the commitment to the current generation and keep the guarantee going. But you must do it soon. We cut $5.3 trillion in spending from the president's budget. We save and strengthen these critical entitlement programs. We get our debt under control. We put our budget on a path to balance and to get the debt completely paid off. The second difference we do is we actually propose to end the cronyism. Get rid of all the corporate welfare. Get rid of the notion that we should be subsidizing this company and not that company. Get rid of the idea that regulators should be picking favorites among those who are connected. Get back to the system of free markets and fair play and transparency and equal rules apply to everybody. Equality under the law, before the law, not equality after the law. Now, the other big difference, and I'll finish with this, is tax reform. We propose to do fundamental tax reform. Of all the things you can do in this country to help get people back to work, back onto the path to prosperity, you have to acknowledge the fact that basically the income tax system blows up in January. I was on the Ways and Means Committee when President Bush signed those 2 tax bills into law in 2001 and 2003. All tax laws must originate in the House and in the House Ways and Means Committee and then go to the Senate. When that bill left the House, it was permanent. It was never intended to be a temporary tax rate reduction. Then came, you guys ever heard of Tom Daschle? So, then came this thing called the Byrd Rule in the Senate and the filibuster, which is where the Daschle name comes in. And in order to get that tax rate reduction in place, which the 2003 law was to speed it up so we could get out of the slow growth, mild recession we had at the time, which we did because these policies worked, he had no choice but to accept the time limit on it because the Senate refused to go along with making these things permanent. And so now we are where we are. We have a cliff coming at the end of the year. And what we're saying is it actually provides a great opportunity. the code's effectively blowing up, so let's reform it. Let's take a page out of Steve Forbes' playbook and go back with a very common, simple, better system. Lower the rates, broaden the base. Now, guess what? There are a lot of Democrats who agree with us. I served on the Fiscal Commission with Erskine Bowles and Alan Simpson. I have tremendous respect for these gentlemen. There are a lot of Democrats who agree with this idea. Take away the tax shelters, limit the loopholes, lower everybody's tax rates for all so that we can be an entrepreneur, so that we can help those small businesses succeed and compete in the global economy. We propose specifically a 10% bracket and a 25% bracket for individuals and bring that corporate rate back down to 25%. And get rid of this clumsy, outdated, anti-internationally competitive worldwide tax system and go to a territorial system. I won't go through a treaty on what a territorial system means, but it simply is a system that makes sure that we don't keep pushing capital away from America, and we make America the place where you want to keep your capital. We make America a place where you want your headquarters to be located. Look, 95% of the world's population, they're not in this country, they're in other countries. And if we want to be successful, if we want to have high living standards, entrepreneurial, we have to make and export more things. And we need to have tax laws that jive with that. Now, because Japan lowered their corporate tax rate in April, we now are the distinguishing honorees of having the highest in the world. So we think we should lower rates, let people keep more of their own money, and improve the incentives to save, work, and invest. And lowering marginal tax rates does that. You also remove distortions out of the tax code. You allow capital to be deployed where it can do the most good, where it can create the most value, where it can create the most wealth. Not where some bureaucrat thinks it ought to go, but where free individuals in a free enterprise system, chasing opportunity, acting in their own interest, and helping people in their community decide the money ought to go. The other thing I would simply say is you got to keep an eye on competitiveness. If we don't mind the fact that this is a whole new story, the 21st century is not one where the United States is the undisputed economic superpower of the world. We have to be lean, we have to be mean, we have to be competitive. If we keep going down this path where we divide each other and try and come up with this idea that we can tax ourselves at double the rates our competitors are taxing theirs, we will have a welfare state on our hands. We will be slow growth. It will be economic stagnation. Now, the other benefit of all of this is it actually helps our budget quite a bit. Now, the CBO acknowledges if these tax increases hit in January, we'll go down to about 1% growth. It could be even lower than that. And what we're showing with an alternative growth scenario we created in the Budget Committee is if you actually get the kind of plan that President Bush is talking about, if you actually get a growth dividend, you'll balance the budget so much faster. So the secret to success is economic growth along with spending discipline and entitlement reforms. And if we do those three things, we can quickly get America back on the path to prosperity. And the idea at the end of the day here is this. Then we revive the system of upward mobility. And so here's what it all comes down to at the end of the day. We don't like the direction the president's taking the country. We think he is putting the country on a very dangerous path, on a path that is a government-centered society, on a path to debt and decline. And we believe that if we follow this path, it will not end well for anybody, because then you have a debt crisis. And in a debt crisis, the people who need government the most at a very vulnerable time in their life are the ones who get hurt the first. We believe in prosperity. We believe in upward mobility. We believe in equality of opportunity, not equality of outcome, which means we want to put these kinds of pro-growth policies in place. And in order to do that, we have to ask the country for permission. And so our commitment is this. We can't simply win an election by default, by running against the guy and then hopefully winning a negative war. We have to have an affirming election. That's why we're putting these ideas out there.